Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 65. Good story. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the novel Project Hail Mary. How you doing today, Mike?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great as well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world, continuing what I've been doing. I'm almost done with the alpha draft of Zara 2. I'm on the final act. I should have that done today, probably tomorrow. I'll have that done, which will be nice, and then I can hand that off to my friends and switch over to something else, either editing the Deep Dark or outlining Zara 3 or working on cover design for Zara 2. Something. It'll be something new for a few weeks as they read the story. Yeah, that's it right now. What's going on new in your writing world?
I am so close to finishing a Cliptic. Oh, I just have like all those little threads to tie up, right? All these little details to make sure that's all done. I've done a whole bunch of little closing scenes, and I've just got to make sure the details are there and weave them together. So it's like, I was really hoping to be finished today, but it's not quite. But it's almost there. It's almost there.
Okay,
Yay!
tomorrow then. We'll both finish tomorrow.
I don't know if I can finish tomorrow, but I'll try.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, very close, very excited about that. Getting ready to upload some audiobook videos. I have an audiobook. It's the Temporal Protection Corps, which is my time travel series, the origin story for the Temporal Protection Corps and the villain. And that's going to be only available on Patreon. So I've not been working on that too much because I've been trying to get the Ecliptic done. But I'd like to get that up on Patreon for my time travel fans there so that they have access to that audiobook whenever they want it. So I'm working on that, getting the video put together. And that's about it. I mean, I've always got a lot of things I'm juggling. There's always things to be juggled. But those are the big things that I've been working on.
Great.
So as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon. And you can read The Tales of Zara, the first book in the Tales of Zara, on Amazon in both episodic format, which is on Kindle Vella, as well as ebook and paperback formats. And those links are in the show notes. And if you're interested in the time travel series, the audiobooks are available on YouTube to listen to for free. And if you want to listen to the audiobook and read the novel in ebook format for the origin story in that time travel series, those will be available on Patreon soon. And what interesting stories have you come across lately in books or movies or television?
Let's see. I've been continuing watching Star Trek Discovery. I wrapped up season 3, which I like the way that they finished it. And then now I've started season 4. I didn't realize that it was released weekly. I really hate that now. I just want to watch the whole season at once. So I'm part of the way through season 4, whatever episode they've gone up to. And also continuing to watch Fallout, the show based off of the video game series.
Yes.
Which is, like I said, I didn't play the video games. But now watching the show, I realize this is a very adult TV show.
Yes.
So for anyone interested in watching it, just know what you're getting into. And I think that's it, other than obviously the book that we're going to discuss today. What stories have you been consuming?
I have been consuming the Star Trek documentary, The Center Seat. which has been interesting.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
It's available on Prime. It's part of the Paramount Plus membership
Okay.
through Amazon Prime. And so it's essentially a documentary about 55 years of Star Trek. So that was, let's see, when was that? So that 2021 would have been 55 years, I believe. And so it's just, and it sort of digs into some of the complications and the complexities of getting Star Trek produced as an original series, and then getting the movies produced, and then getting the new series produced, and it's for the most part it's pretty interesting. Some of it's sort of like, oh, egos and personalities, and that part isn't, obviously there are egos and personalities, right? So
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
without saying, but other parts of it have been just sort of interesting little tidbits of information about the series that I really have enjoyed for 55 years or plus. So that's been interesting. And, I'm glad to hear you talk about the adultness of Fallout, because my offspring wants to watch it. And I have agreed to watch it, even though I saw the trailer. I think I already mentioned this, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. And like every 10 seconds I was saying, gross, gross,
Yeah.
gross. So, yeah, with that in mind, I will watch Fallout, and hopefully I'm not like super grossed out.
Well, you know what you're getting in for, at least.
Yeah, I hope.
Yeah, maybe.
Are you ready to talk about Project Hail Mary?
Yeah, I am. Let's do it.
Today we're talking about the story told in the novel Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And I will read the blurb from the back of the book. Ryland Grace is the sole survivor on a desperate last chance mission. And if he fails, humanity and Earth itself will perish. Except that right now, he doesn't know that. He can't even remember his own name, let alone the nature of his assignment or how to complete it. All he knows is that he's been asleep for a very long time, and he's just been awakened to find himself millions of miles from home with nothing but 2 corpses for company. His crewmates dead, his memories fuzzily returning, Ryland realizes that an impossible task now confronts him. Hurtling through space on this tiny ship, he must puzzle out an impossible scientific mystery and conquer an extinction-level threat to our species. And with the clock ticking down and the nearest human being light years away, he's got to do it all alone. Or does he? Did you enjoy this story?
Yeah, that's a really cool premise you read there. I like that.
Yeah, it's off the back of the paperback.
Yeah. I almost feel like it gives too much away, but you gotta hook the reader. So
Yeah.
I didn't read that, so I knew nothing about this story going into it, which I
Okay.
think was good, because like everything was a surprise that was happening. So yes, I very much like this story. It's definitely the most hard sci-fi story I've ever read. I've read some pretty good hard sci-fi stuff before, but nothing to this level. It's just chock full of science, so that's something to be aware of, and I'm sure we'll discuss that more in a bit. But yeah, I really like the story. It got me interested in it right away. Like I said, I didn't read the back of the book blurb or anything about it. All I knew was it was written by the guy who wrote The Martian. That was it. But right from the beginning, it caught my attention, and it sets up an interesting character. We see Grace is very early on. We see that he's very agentive. He's very proactive. He's very determined, and he's very tenacious. So we can really latch on to him as a character. And I love the way that the mystery of the story is revealed, especially in the early part of the book, how it's slowly unveils more and more about what's going on, why he's there, what his mission is. I love the way that he set that up. And then, like I said, I like the high concept. It's so out there with the idea of the astrophage, but it's easy to grasp and it's easy to follow along. And for me, even with the hard science, I was still able to go along with it. There was a lot there, but it wasn't so much that it pushed me out of the story. Part of that may just be because I'm interested in a lot of that. So it didn't drag me out, which was good. And I loved story-wise that there are just constant complications, which it made me think that that's probably pretty necessary for what is essentially a one-character book, at least at the beginning of the story, for a while, right? It's like you need these complications to keep the plot going. And then obviously later more characters come in as he does the flashbacks, and then he meets the alien. And even then, there's just constant complications. Not only like present day, but also in the past, like how are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle that? Really good stuff. Really keeps the plot moving. I loved the first contact component of the story. That's always such a fun thing to imagine. I have that in one of my books, The Deep Dark, which hopefully I'll get out this year. So it was fun to see how he handled it. Yeah, and I thought he did it so well and with such attention to detail and going through step by step. I really appreciated the way that he unveiled that. I liked also how he being the author, explains the problems that the character is facing well enough that if you're paying attention and if you have a grasp of some of the science, or at least of, what came before leading up to this point, you can just predict what's coming right before he reveals what's going on, right? Like, for example, at the end, when the Astrophades gets eaten on his way back to Earth, I immediately think, as soon as I realize what happened, oh, poor Rocky, because he's going to be going through the same thing in his ship. And then obviously, that's what happens and he has to go back there. So there's things like that where it reminds me of something I heard about writing mysteries, like a pure mystery novel, where you want it to be a mystery right up to the point where it gets revealed, where there's just enough at that moment before it's revealed where a savvy reader can figure it out themselves, so that you get the sense of satisfaction of like, oh, I figured it out, right? But it's
the dopamine rush of being right.
Yeah, and it's just before it's revealed. So, if you figure it out three chapters in, then the story feels kind of pointless. So he does that over and over and over and over throughout this book. And I don't know if that was an intentional thing, but I will give him credit for that. I just assume that it is. Whereas what's happening now, and it's like if you were paying attention, you can kind of figure it out just before it reveals. Anyway, I really like that, and that happens throughout the story. It was great. I love how he opens up all those mysteries and then explains them by the end, right? So you're not left hanging. What are these 30 things that he talked about that were problems that he didn't get to? So I think, as far as I can tell, on only just one read through, I think he pretty much wraps up all the stuff that he opens up. And so it feels satisfying at the end because of that. You're not left wondering, wait, what about this? What about that? I also really enjoyed how he built up the relationship between the protagonist, Grace, and Rocky over time. We get the first contact, and then they weren't just thrown into a situation where it's like, okay, we're good. It's like they're kind of a little trepidation, and then they had to slowly work together and learn their language, and they really built this bond by the end of the story. And I thought that felt very natural, and it was a lot of fun the way he did that. And yeah, it was very enjoyable to read that whole relationship development process. And from a technical perspective, I really liked how he used memories as flashback scenes. Thought that was really smart. It lets the main character learn what happened along with the reader, which was fun because we get to see how the character reacts to each new memory, and in addition to our own reaction to it. So I thought that was smart too. I loved a lot of the other characters. I loved the Strat character. I thought was really fun. This super efficient, no nonsense, get it done at any cost kind of thing. I thought that was great and appropriate for that role. And let's see. And one of the things is I felt like I was there with the characters the whole time. It always felt very immediate. And I think because of the way he constantly opens mysteries and complications, and you're there with him, you're trying to solve it yourself. What's going on? What happened this time? It really keeps you in the moment. So I think he did that really well. Anyway, it's a lot. There's a lot going on for this book. There's more I could certainly talk about, but I want to hear what you think about it.
My thoughts are going to be just echoes of yours because I had the very similar thoughts. I loved the relationship between Grace and Rocky, and that was my favorite part of the story. And when I would get excited when it was scenes related to their working together and interacting. And I actually got choked up when they said goodbye and had to go their separate ways back to their worlds.
Yeah.
I mean, it made me sad because I had appreciated that relationship so very much. I also thought it was incredibly clever the way he did those memories and those flashbacks, and essentially to take the story to a new level. They were almost like little stair steps to take the story to new levels of complexity and new levels of information, and new problems were sometimes introduced in those flashbacks to then tell us what he was going to have to face next. I thought that was incredibly well done. And they were paced well enough so that you didn't spend too much time in one place or the other, either in the memory or in the reality. I mean, I don't think, for me, in my opinion, I loved the interactions between Grace and Rocky. So you could stay with Grace and Rocky for the entire time. But there also needed to be sort of this background information to understand what was happening and how to solve the next problem. And so I think the way that was paced was really well done. I really enjoyed the book. I actually found myself missing reading it when I was done. I'm sad that it was over.
Yeah, me too.
The other thing I actually really enjoyed was that I've read The Martian as well as seen the movie. And at the beginning, the character felt a little bit like Watney, a little bit snarky, a little bit, sciencey and sarcastic. But as the story progressed, we realized that he's actually not at all like Watney. And he was not a brave astronaut who volunteered to go to Mars and, become part of this expedition. We learned that he's actually a profound coward who was press ganged into going on this mission against his will. And I thought that was a really interesting twist to the development of the character, especially at the end when, he was dragged kicking and screaming into a suicide mission. And then at the end, he volunteered for a suicide mission.
There's another great reveal, a great setup and a great reveal for that. I love that.
And the difference was he was unwilling to save the world, but incredibly willing to save his best friend and sacrifice himself.
That's great.
And so that was the interesting journey, right? His arc was so subtle and so long, and then bam, you got to see where he had grown and learned. And it was I thought it was really well done. So was there anything that you would have changed as a writer?
Yeah, there were a few things I would change, possibly. I think sort of like a global level, I would probably have shortened the story a little bit, maybe remove a couple of complications. As much as I liked all the science in it, it did start to feel a little bit like science overload toward the end. I know my brain can only take so much of it for so long. So I would probably just have shortened it just a little bit. I think you could have had the same exact story with just a few less obstacles that they had to face. More specifically, one thing that I felt wasn't addressed satisfactorily for me was when the astrophage fuel gets eaten by the Talmebas. My first thought was, it spelled doom for Rocky because he had no corrective mechanism for dealing with cosmic rays, which they were now going to be exposed to. And then again at the end, when Rocky's ship loses its fuel, the same thing, he loses the protection. I would just have liked to have seen the author address that again, one more time, specifically why he survived both of those times. Relatively small thing, but given how meticulous this story was crafted, those stood out to me just a little bit. And then I would have had something in the last chapter about how Grace had trouble telling the aliens apart for a long time, given that, he's there and he knows Rocky, but presumably to him, all these aliens probably look pretty much the same. There's not much reason for them visually to be distinct because they don't have eyes and they can't see each other that way. So I would have liked to have seen how, some note of how do they tell each other apart? Presumably it would be some kind of physical characteristics that their sonar could pick up. And then when he's dealing with the students, he has 20, 30, however many students. How does he tell them apart, right? So I would have just liked to see some note about that. Again, it's not a huge thing. It doesn't really affect the story that much. But it would have been kind of cool to tie that off. And then I don't know that I would have changed this, but I will admit that I was slightly dissatisfied with the ending. Only because he'd gone through this crazy experience by himself, at least from a human perspective, not counting Rocky, being the only one to survive this journey, right? His two companions were corpses, like he mentioned at the beginning. And then to make first contact with an alien species. Finally, we see there's another intelligent species out there in the universe. And he works together to solve this problem and save both planets. But he never really gets any specific acknowledgement for that. It's like, oh, I just so wanted that for him. So it was dissatisfying from just like that one perspective. And then I also kind of wanted to know, I wanted to have Grace wonder about the humans back home, or at least Strat. Like, did she suffer any consequences for her action? Just have him think about that. So just maybe a little bit more in the resolution of the story is basically what I'm saying. That's it.
Yeah.
Those are my things. And again, they're all pretty small.
My things are very similar. Along the same lines of you're saying, how did Rocky survive the radiation, the cosmic radiation? I wanted something similar. And I think I think we could go ahead and sort of sum this up as we needed a little bit more of the biologic explanations, because I also wanted to know, how did the crew die? It was just sort of some kind of nebulous.
Yeah.
They just didn't survive coma, the long sleep coma. Well, why? They had the DNA. Why didn't they survive? I would have liked to have had some information about that. Something specific, that the computer had recorded that she died of a heart attack and he died of a undiagnosed brain tumor that blossomed in the 13 years while they, something.
Yeah.
That explained it.
I think I
in the same way
that he did explain that, but yeah, you're right. I don't think he did.
I don't think he did.
Yeah.
He just said they didn't survive the sleep,
Yeah.
the coma sleep. So, why not? Okay, so there was that. It's a small thing, but it was just this niggling thing that I was kind of like, okay, well, how does he know it isn't going to happen to him on the way back? And I would have loved to have that fear be a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
Either the fear be concrete, like I could have a heart attack or I could have cancer, or that they can't, or the realization that whatever happened to them wasn't going to happen to him, and then take that sort of fear off the table. One way or the other, I think would have been really nice. And the same thing goes with Rocky. So, okay, do we just assume that he's somehow immune to cosmic radiation? I think something a little bit more specific about that might have been helpful. Similarly, I also would have liked a little bit more. For me, I wasn't so worried about identifying what, the Iridians looked like, because I think humans are pretty good about that. That might have been a nice layer too, just to say, oh, it took me a long time to be able to recognize the differences, but I started looking at their, structure of their carapace or whatever. Something like that. But I wanted to know more about this dome, because I would have gone mad in a dome that, wasn't very big. So how big was this dome? Did it provide, did he get to hear the sounds of wind? Did he get rain? Did they, I think it would have been crazy making to be trapped in a small space and not be able to get out. So how big was it? I would have liked to have had more details. Maybe something along the lines of they took their trees that could only grow in their ammonia, and using the same techniques that they did with the Taumiba, figured out a way to grow the trees in the oxygen nitrogen environment, and that gave him trees in his environment. Something along those lines. And then finally, I agree with you 100%. I would have loved it if we had like an epilogue that took place from the perspective of maybe Strat on the receipt of the beetles, and what they did and what they learned, and their excitement of realizing that Grace had done it. And it had been Grace that did it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What did he tell them, right? Did he give them basically a journal of his whole time there? Did they know what happened? Did they know?
They were going to have to know about Rocky, because because Rocky gave them the box that was the iridium steel,
Right.
right? This would be an alloy that was never created on Earth. So they would have known it had to come from an extraterrestrial source. I would have loved to have gotten just to have the satisfaction, like you said. I think that was a great way of putting it. The satisfaction of them seeing and learning about his experience. Because I think he would have. I think he would have given him the exact journal, told him exactly what he did,
Yeah.
how he did it, who he did it with. I think that would have been cool. So what themes did you identify in Project Hail Mary?
Yeah, this is a good one. I think for me, going back to sort of how I define the theme as like what's the universal message of the story, and seeing how it's typically manifested in the climactic moment. What does the protagonist, what does the hero do in that climactic moment that usually points us toward the theme? So if I take it from that perspective and I look at what happened here, I think it's what you mentioned before about him going from a coward to doing something that was selfless, right? If we look at the horrible choice he had to make at the end of, I really want to go back home and be with my people and be the hero and save Earth, but I also kind of want to save my friend and save his people and his planet. But to do that, I know I'm dying, right? And that's the choice he makes. So I think that's what leads us to the theme, which I would say very simply is maybe bravery is its own reward, or something like sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater good or the greater cause, or like you said, the friends. Something like that, I think, is what is pointing us toward the theme, which is kind of interesting because I didn't get a sense of that really throughout the story until we got the flashback and saw that he didn't want to go on this journey. And then I think it became revealed at that point. But once it does get revealed, if you look back at the story, it's like it leads you up to that point. So it's a very clever way of telling the story and a very clever way of revealing the theme, I think. So that is the theme that I get out of it. What do you see as the theme or themes?
I think that's a great theme. I think that you identified a very strong theme. And the theme I identified is very much connected to that theme, which is sort of the universality of friendship and connection. Because his cowardly behavior, as Strat pointed out, was because he really didn't have any connections on Earth. And once he made a connection with Rocky, then he was able to find his bravery.
Yeah, that's great.
So I would layer with the bravery, and the bravery being its own reward with that universality, that that he was even able to make a best friend with a life form that was completely different from him, and that they were able to find this social connection together. I love that theme.
Yeah, I love how when they first connect, they're both so excited to like have somebody else there. They like to not be alone. It's such a good moment. So many good moments in this book.
Yes. So as a writer, what do you take away from this story?
Yeah, so the writing takeaway, let's see. I mean, there's a lot to take away from the story. I'm going to focus on something that just really stood out to me, which is don't be afraid to get into the weeds of the science, or let's call it just more generally the world building, as long as it serves the story, right? You don't want to become so obsessed with your world or your science that you push it too far, but don't be afraid to tap into it to aid the story. So that's my writing takeaway. What would you take away?
That's a good one. That's a really good one, because you know what? He did some incredibly skilled info dumps that did not feel like info dumps.
Yeah.
Yeah. My takeaway is to focus on the relationship, because that's what I loved in this story. And it's okay to go into the weeds on the relationship building, which is essentially what he did with that too. So our takeaways are weed related.
Yes, that's another great one. That was the other one that really quickly came to mind. Was exactly what you said. Yeah, so fun.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in The Martian. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.